It was exactly midnight when the sound that shattered the silence of my small Kansas house tore me awake. Not the creak of the old pipes, not the wind pressing against the siding, but a scrape harsh and deliberate like wood dragging across wood. My heart jolted into my throat. For a moment, I lay still frozen beneath the thin sheet listening. Then it came again, louder this time, the legs of a chair grating against the floorboards of the living room. I knew that sound too well. In our house, chairs were weapons long before fists, and when Vanessa touched one, violence followed. My body went cold, a film of sweat slicking my palms as I pushed myself upright, the room thick with the scent of detergent and old cedar, the kind of comfort that mocked me now. The door slammed open so hard it cracked the wall. My sister filled the frame, hair-wild eyes glassy from drink, her breath carrying the sour stench of whiskey. In her hands, she clutched one of the heavy oak dining chairs, the legs jutting out like sharpened spears. Her smile was a slash of cruelty across her face. Behind her, in the dim hallway light, stood my mother, Donna, arms folded across her chest. She didn't look shocked. She didn't flinch. Her lips curled into something that was not quite a smile, not quite a sneer, just that cold smirk I had come to know too well. My throat locked. I wanted to shout to demand why, but Vanessa moved first. With a guttural scream, she swung the chair with both arms, the air splitting as wood hurtled toward me. The impact landed with a sound I will never forget, a sickening crack that echoed through my ribs, shattering bone and stealing my breath. White-hot pain exploded through my chest, my lungs seizing as if the air itself had betrayed me. I collapsed sideways, the sheet tangling around my legs, my hands clutching at my side where fire burned beneath my skin. Blood bubbled at my lips, the taste metallic and sharp. I gasped for air, but each inhale stabbed deeper ribs grinding against each other like broken glass. Vanessa loomed above me, lifting the chair again, her face twisted with satisfaction. "You never belonged here," she hissed, her voice low, venomous. Each word landed heavier than the blow itself. My vision blurred dark spots swimming across the ceiling. I clawed at the floorboards, trying to push myself backward, my fingernails tearing against splinters, streaks of blood marking every desperate inch. Behind her, Donna leaned casually against the doorframe, arms still folded, eyes locked on me with that chilling detachment. And then came the words that cut deeper than the wood, deeper than the bone cracking in my chest. "Serves you right," she murmured, her smirk widening. My own mother. The betrayal was worse than the agony ripping through my ribs. The chair came down again, striking the edge of my arm, sending a shockwave of pain that left my hand limp. I screamed, a raw animal sound that filled the house. A sound I knew neighbors could hear but would not answer. In our town, silence was safety. Silence was complicity. And they had chosen silence long before tonight. Vanessa laughed, a sound sharp and triumphant, lifting the chair for a third strike. My body convulsed instinct, screaming at me to move, to live. I shoved against the dresser with my good arm, sliding across the floor, just as the chair slammed into the boards where my head had been. Wood, splintered shards scattering across my skin. My chest screamed in agony, every breath shallow, ragged. I dragged myself forward, inch by inch, the hallway, a tunnel of shadows, stretching longer with each desperate crawl. Donna stepped aside smoothly, giving Vanessa a clear path, as if my mother had become the stagehand to my execution. "You will never rise above us," Vanessa hissed, her shadow following mine across the floor. Blood dripped from my lips, staining the wood in dark streaks. My nightgown clung to me damp with sweat and blood heavy as chains. Still, I pushed on, nails clawing, leaving proof of my existence with each smear. Vanessa's footsteps followed, deliberate, slow, savoring my weakness. "Let her crawl." Donna's voice floated coldly, almost bored. "She'll come back." That calmness broke something inside me more than the blows. The belief that no matter how much they destroyed me, I would return to them broken but obedient. Rage flared through the haze of pain, sharper than the crack in my ribs. No, Not tonight. I reached the front door, the brass knob slick in my bloodied hand. My vision doubled, but I twisted it with every shred of strength. The wood groaned, the door swung open, and cold night air crashed into me like a wave slicing against my fevered skin. The Texas night smelled of dust and cut grass, the cicadas humming like cruel witnesses. My body collapsed onto the porch boards, every bone screaming. But survival drove me forward. Gravel tore into my palms as I dragged myself down the steps, each scrape carving new agony into my skin. Behind me, I could feel their eyes watching. Not chasing confident, I wouldn't make it far. Vanessa's laugh echoed in the doorway. Donna's silence heavier than any pursuit. They believed the town would finish me off with their disbelief. They believed no sheriff, no neighbor, no doctor would ever take my side. My chest convulsed, lungs gasping for air around the jagged edges of broken ribs. I forced myself onward, each inch across the gravel driveway lit by the faint moonlight, every rock biting, every movement defiance. The stars above blurred cold and endless, but inside me something burned hotter than pain. Not here, not like this. My whisper rasped through blood-stained lips. They will not erase me. My ribs screamed my body failing, but my spirit locked onto that fragile thread of survival. The faint glow of the road shimmered ahead. Salvation. Distant but real. I dragged myself forward, every gasp an oath, every drop of blood a testimony. That night at midnight beneath the smirk of my own mother and the blows of my sister's chair, I understood one truth that would carry me through everything that came after silence was not safety. Silence was their weapon, and I refused it. To understand how I ended up crawling across gravel at midnight with broken ribs and blood soaking my nightgown, you need to understand the house I grew up in, the twisted rules of my family, and the way silence was woven into every brick of our lives. On the outside, the Monroe family looked like any other small-town clan in Kansas. My mother Donna played her part as the polite, church-going widow who remarried for stability, always smiling at Sunday service, always bringing pies to potlucks, her hair perfectly curled, her dresses pressed so neatly that people whispered she was a picture of resilience. To neighbors, she was strong, graceful, and blessed. My younger sister Vanessa was the crown jewel of that image, the golden child who was praised for her beauty, her charm, her effortless way of capturing attention. At school, she was homecoming queen at church, she sang in the youth choir, and at every family gathering, she was introduced as the one destined for greatness. People adored her wide smile and her rehearsed politeness, never noticing the cruelty she reserved for me once the door shut. And then there was me, Rachel, the older daughter, the one who never quite belonged in Donna's carefully crafted picture. From the moment I could remember, I was positioned as the shadow to Vanessa's light, the servant to her princess. If the table was set, I set it. If tea needed pouring, I poured it. If chores piled up, they were handed to me while Vanessa floated by, untouched, rewarded for simply existing. My achievements, however rare, were dismissed as exaggerations or lies. When I earned good grades, Donna said I had too much time on my hands. When I received a scholarship letter at 17, she ripped it in half before I could even finish reading, telling me family comes first, that Monroe girls did not need fancy programs. Vanessa laughed that day, calling me dramatic for crying over paper. The pieces of that torn letter became the first page of my secret journal, a book I hid beneath my mattress, a book that would one day prove I wasn't imagining the cruelty. Every page was a wound I recorded to remind myself it was real. Over the years, that journal grew thick with entries. Notes about dinners where I was told to sit against the wall while Donna and Vanessa laughed in the glow of praise. Notes about chores that stretched from dawn until midnight while Vanessa spent weekends with friends. Notes about gaslighting conversations where every attempt to speak was turned back on me. "Stop making things up," they would say. "You're too sensitive. Why do you always play the victim?" At church, Pastor Whitmore would shake Donna's hand and praise her for raising two lovely daughters. Vanessa would smile, the congregation nodding with approval. If anyone's eyes drifted to me, they quickly moved on as though I were a ghost, invisible. That was the role I played in our town. The humiliation cut deepest during celebrations. On Vanessa's birthdays, the yard was decorated with string lights, tables overflowing with food, neighbors arriving with casseroles. Donna would toast her younger daughter Frank, my stepfather would brag about her future, and Vanessa would bask in the attention like a queen. On my birthdays, there were no decorations, no candles, no songs. Once I whispered at dinner, "Guess no cake for me," and Donna snapped, "Tonight is about your sister." The guests laughed nervously, unwilling to contradict her. I carried the plates, cheeks burning, while Vanessa smirked, whispering to her friends that I was pathetic. That night, I wrote every detail in my journal, carving the humiliation into the page so I would never forget how it felt to be erased in plain sight. Violence wasn't always chairs or fists in those days. More often, it was sharp words, cold dismissals, the subtle cutting down that left me doubting my own worth. But sometimes it turned physical. A shove into the dirt when no one was watching. A slap across the face when I dared to answer back. Once Vanessa pushed me so hard against the porch rail that my shoulder dislocated. Donna told the doctor it happened while I was clumsy in the barn. I remember her exact words. "She's always been careless," and the doctor, like everyone else in town, believed her. The cycle was clear. Vanessa could do no wrong. Donna protected her image at any cost, and I was the expendable daughter whose pain maintained their story. Every time I tried to resist, I was beaten down with silence or laughter. The town admired our family for discipline and strength, never seeing the cracks behind closed doors. People waved at Donna in the grocery store, praised Vanessa at school, nodded at Frank's presence in church. No one asked why I stood off to the side. No one wondered about the bruises beneath my sleeves. No one cared why my smile never reached my eyes. They accepted the picture because it was easier. And so I grew up carrying the weight of being invisible every day, reinforcing the belief that my voice had no place in our home. But invisibility breeds fire in secret. With every humiliation, every torn scholarship, every shove into silence, something in me hardened. My journal became not just a record, but a weapon I was storing for the day they would not be able to deny me anymore. Still, I could never have predicted that the weapon they would use to try to erase me once and for all would be a chair crashing against my ribs at midnight. That night wasn't sudden. It was the culmination of decades of being told I was nothing, of being sacrificed for the image of perfection. It was the night the mask Donna had worn so carefully cracked just enough for me to see her smirk, the same smirk she had used for years to cover her complicity. It was the night Vanessa proved she was not just the golden child, but the weapon Donna had forged to keep me broken. And it was the night I decided that silence would end, even if it cost me everything. Humiliation in my family was not an isolated event, it was a ritual, a daily seasoning sprinkled on every interaction to remind me that I was lesser, unworthy, disposable. The worst part was how seamless it looked to outsiders. How easily Donna wrapped cruelty in the packaging of discipline, how Vanessa sharpened her smile into a blade. The Monroe house was not just a home, it was a theater, and I was cast as the fool, the scapegoat, the background character who kept the show running while never being allowed to stand center stage. I remember one birthday of Vanessa's when I was 21, already out of high school, but still stuck in that suffocating house because I couldn't afford rent on my own yet. The yard glittered with fairy lights, tables groaned under the weight of casseroles and pies, music blared from rented speakers. Dozens of neighbors came clapping Vanessa on the back, praising her beauty, telling Donna what a marvelous daughter she had raised. Donna beamed. Frank laughed, and Vanessa floated from guest to guest like a monarch. I was in the kitchen scrubbing pots so greasy the water turned black, my dress clinging with sweat from the stove heat. At one point, a neighbor peeked in, surprised to see me alone, and asked, "Don't you want to join the party?" Donna appeared instantly, her hand gripping my shoulder too hard, her smile painted on. "Rachel prefers helping," she said sweetly. "She's shy, not good with people." The neighbor nodded, satisfied with the lie, and went back to the music. My jaw clenched as I wiped grease off my hands, the laughter outside stabbing at me with every beat. Later, when the cake came out, a 3-tier monstrosity with Vanessa's name in bright frosting, I wasn't called to the table. I stood in the doorway, invisible as always, and when I whispered under my breath, Guess no cake for me. Donna's head snapped up. Tonight is about your sister. She snapped the sharpness in her tone, cutting through the music. The room hushed for a moment, then laughter bubbled up awkward and complicit as Vanessa smirked and blew out her candles. I went back to the sink, tears burning my eyes, my hands raw from scalding water, and that night I wrote 3 pages in my journal describing every flicker of humiliation. I wrote it down because I knew one day I would need to prove to myself that it had happened, that I wasn't crazy, that the cruelty was real. Violence was layered into those humiliations like poison mixed into food. Sometimes it was a shove when no one was looking, sometimes a slap across the face for talking back. Vanessa, with her perfect nails and charming smile, had a darkness that only surfaced when it was just us. Once, she cornered me in the barn and shoved me so hard into the wooden wall that my shoulder dislocated. I screamed, my arm dangling uselessly, pain white-hot, and Donna rushed in not to help, but to craft the story. She told the doctor I was clumsy, that I had slipped while cleaning. The doctor believed her like everyone else. Donna even managed to sigh about how hard it was having a careless daughter, shaking her head with the exasperation of a martyr. I sat there, tears streaming my shoulder, throbbing, and I realized she would rather gaslight the entire world than admit Vanessa had done anything wrong. That was the lesson over and over. Vanessa's violence became my shame, Donna's lies became my prison, and silence became my only option. Another time, when I was 23, I landed a small recognition at the school where I worked as a teaching assistant. The principal had praised me in front of the staff, handing me a certificate for my dedication. It was nothing grand, just a piece of paper, but to me, it was proof that I was capable, that outside our house someone could see my worth. I brought it home, my hands trembling with pride, and showed it to Donna at the dinner table. She glanced at it once, her lip curling, and said, "Useless. You think this matters? Family comes first." She took the certificate, tore it in two, and dropped the pieces into the trash, while Vanessa laughed across the table, clapping her hands like it was a comedy skit. I sat frozen, my cheeks burning, my stomach twisting. And that night, I dug the torn pieces out of the trash and taped them into my journal. Proof, evidence, a record that I wasn't imagining the contempt. Gaslighting was their favorite tool. Every time I tried to stand up for myself, every time I pointed out the injustice, I was told I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too unstable. "You're making things up," Donna would say. Her voice calm, her smirk cold. "Stop playing the victim," Vanessa would echo, rolling her eyes. After a while, I began to wonder if they were right, if maybe I was broken for feeling pain. But the bruises on my arms, the dislocated shoulder, the scraps of torn paper in my journal, they whispered otherwise. The humiliation didn't end in private moments. It was public, too. At church, Donna would seat me at the far end of the pew, Vanessa beside her, all smiles for the congregation. Pastor Whitmore would shake Donna's hand, praise her for raising such lovely daughters, and Donna would beam while Vanessa basked. If anyone looked at me, I dropped my eyes because I knew if I dared to speak, Donna would punish me later. The punishment didn't always need fists. It could be silence at dinner, exclusion from meals, a cold glare that lasted for hours. But sometimes fists came anyway, or chairs or walls. Each humiliation stacked on the last, a tower of pain that grew taller each year, a weight pressing down on my chest, even when I tried to breathe freely. Yet beneath that weight, something else grew. Each journal entry was a seed of defiance. Each humiliation recorded was a refusal to let them erase me completely. I told myself one day someone would read these pages and know the truth. One day, the lies would collapse under the weight of evidence. I didn't know when or how, but I clung to that thought. It was all I had. Looking back, it seems inevitable that the violence would escalate, that humiliation alone would not satisfy Vanessa, that Donna's smirk would not remain passive. They needed more. They needed to break me completely. And at midnight, with a chair swinging into my ribs, they tried. But what they didn't know was that humiliation had already built my resistance, that every cruel word had sharpened me, that every slap had become a reason to survive. The tower of pain they built became the foundation of my fight. And though they broke my ribs, they did not break my will. That night, the air in the Monroe house was heavy, as if it carried a warning my body understood before my mind did. The clock ticked toward midnight, each second scraping like metal against bone. I had gone to bed early, my chest tight from a long day of chores, my mind still reeling from the bruises of words Vanessa had flung that evening. She had mocked me in front of visiting relatives, calling me a freeloader, a dreamer with no spine. And Donna had only smiled, sipping her tea, as though cruelty was just another form of conversation. I lay in bed, the sheets damp with sweat despite the cool September air seeping through the window cracks. My journal was under my pillow, filled with years of entries, each one a record of humiliation, each one proof that my pain was real. I remember pressing my fingers against the leather cover as if its presence could shield me. Then came the sound. The groan of floorboards in the hallway, slow, deliberate, the kind of sound that made the hair rise on the back of my neck. My body stiffened, heart pounding so hard I could taste copper on my tongue. The door creaked open, and there she was. Vanessa, her silhouette blocking the hall light. Her hair was wild, her breath thick with the stench of whiskey, and in her hands, clutched tightly, was a wooden chair lifted high above her head. For a second, I thought she was playing some twisted joke, but then her voice slurred out, dripping with venom. "You think you're better than me, Rachel. You think you can write down your little stories and matter tonight? I'll write the ending." The chair came down before I could move the crack of wood against my ribs, exploding like lightning through my chest. Pain radiated outward white-hot, stealing the air from my lungs. I gasped, but no breath came, only a sharp wheeze, my body convulsing. The taste of blood filled my mouth, metallic and warm, as I choked on it. Vanessa laughed, a sharp, manic sound that cut through the silence. Again she raised the chair, her eyes glinting with a madness I had never seen so naked before, and again it crashed into my side. This time I felt something shift deep inside, the unmistakable snap of bone giving way. The agony so intense my vision blurred at the edges. I screamed a raw animal sound, but the walls of that house swallowed it, the sound bouncing uselessly back at me. And then I saw her, Donna, leaning against the doorframe, her arms folded, her mouth twisted into that cold smirk I had known all my life. She didn't shout for Vanessa to stop. She didn't move to help me. Instead, she tilted her head and whispered low and cruel, "Serves you right. My own mother." The betrayal sliced deeper than the chair ever could. Vanessa swung again, and this time the impact knocked me off the bed entirely, my body slamming against the wooden floor, my breath rattling. I tried to crawl, my arms trembling under me, but the pain in my ribs was too much. Each inhale was like knives stabbing into my lungs. I clutched my side fingers, coming away slick with blood from a gash the broken wood had carved into my skin. Vanessa loomed above me, her face twisted with glee, her teeth bared as if she were feeding on my fear. Donna stood still, her silence screaming louder than any words, her smirk a seal of approval on my sister's violence. I dragged myself inch by inch toward the doornails, scraping across the floorboards, leaving streaks of blood in my wake. Vanessa's voice followed me, cruel and mocking. "Crawl, little dreamer, crawl. You'll never escape us." The chair came down again, missing my head by inches, splintering against the floor. Shards of wood flew, cutting into my arm, stinging, but I kept moving, desperation pulling me forward when my body wanted to collapse. My vision blurred, spots of light flickering, but survival burned hotter than pain. I reached the hallway, my body trembling, my breaths shallow and ragged. Donna stepped aside to let me pass her, smirk never fading, as though my suffering was her entertainment. I stumbled down the hall, clutching the wall for balance, every movement agony. Behind me, Vanessa's laughter echoed, unhinged, victorious. But inside me, a voice louder than all of it whispered fiercely, "Not tonight, not in silence." The moment I stumbled into the hallway, the house itself became a battlefield. Every shadow seemed to lunge, every floorboard groan echoed like a countdown. My ribs screamed with every shallow breath, the broken edges grinding against my lungs. blood bubbling in my throat. I clutched the wall, my fingernails digging into peeling paint as I dragged myself forward, my vision swimming. Behind me, Vanessa's laughter chased me like a predator. "You'll never make it," she taunted, her voice rising and falling with drunken glee. Donna didn't speak, but I felt her eyes boring into my back, that same cold smirk twisting her face into something less than human. My body screamed for rest, but instinct screamed louder. "Move or die." I stumbled down the stairs, each step jarring my shattered ribs until sparks of agony shot through my body. The living room swam before me, familiar furniture twisted into grotesque shapes by the haze of pain. The family Bible lay open on the coffee table, its words meaningless in this house of cruelty. I tripped over the edge of a rug and hit the floor hard, the impact jolting through my chest. For a moment, I couldn't breathe at all. Panic clawed at my throat, blackness creeping at the edges of my sight. Then a single thought cut through the fog. If you stop here, it's over. I clawed at the carpet, dragging myself forward. Behind me, Vanessa's boots thudded down the stairs, steady, unhurried. She was enjoying the chase. My hands slipped in my own blood as I reached the front door. The knob gleamed in the dim light, salvation just inches away. My trembling fingers stretched slick with sweat and blood, fumbling for the metal. It slipped once, twice before I gritted my teeth and forced it to turn. The door groaned open, and cold night air rushed in, hitting my sweat-drenched skin like ice water. I collapsed onto the porch, gasping, my chest burning as air fought to enter my lungs past the broken bones. Gravel cut into my palms as I dragged myself off the steps and onto the driveway, each stone a needle slicing my flesh. The night was thick, the Texas sky stretching endless above me, stars cold and indifferent. Somewhere distant, a dog barked, then a coyote howled, the sound slicing through the darkness. Behind me, the door slammed open, wood rattling in its frame. Vanessa's voice rang out sharp and mocking. "Crawl faster, Rachel. The coyotes might get you before I do." I pushed forward, nails tearing, leaving a crimson trail across the gravel. Each movement felt like fire ripping through my chest, but the thought of her boots stomping closer drove me harder. Donna stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her smirk visible even in the dim porch light. She wasn't chasing me, she didn't have to. Her silence was enough, her approval of Vanessa's violence sealing my fate. But I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me stop. I reached the end of the driveway, the rusted metal gate looming before me. My hands shook violently as I pulled myself upright, just enough to unhook the latch. The gate screeched open, the sound echoing across the empty road like a gunshot. I collapsed forward, my face slamming into the dirt road, the taste of dust mixing with blood on my tongue. I forced myself up on my elbows, dragging my broken body inch by inch. Every breath was agony, my ribs grinding, but I whispered to myself with each movement, "Not here, not tonight, not in their silence." My voice cracked, but the words anchored me, a rhythm that kept me moving when my body wanted to surrender. Behind me, Vanessa's voice floated into the night, quieter now, but still cruel. "She'll crawl back. They always crawl back." I clenched my teeth, blood seeping between them, and whispered to the dirt, "I will not." The road stretched endless, lit only by the faint glow of porch lights scattered across the countryside. I crawled past one house, my screams tearing from my throat, raw and desperate. A curtain shifted in the window, a silhouette paused, then the blinds snapped shut. The porch light flicked off. No one came. Their silence was as sharp as Vanessa's chair, as brutal as Donna's smirk. I pushed forward, my elbows raw and torn, my hands shredded on the gravel. My nightgown clung to me, soaked with blood and sweat, heavy as chains. Each foot of progress felt like a mile, but I refused to stop. Another house loomed ahead. Again, I cried out, my voice breaking, "Help me, please, help." A light flicked on, footsteps echoed inside, and for a heartbeat, hope flared. But then the door locked with a decisive click, and the light went dark. Tears blurred my vision, hot against my cold skin, but I kept crawling. Coyotes howled again, closer this time, a reminder of how predators circle weakness. My own family had already proven themselves the worst kind of predators, and I would not let them finish me. My breath came ragged, wheezing, each inhale a knife. My chest felt tight as though my lungs were filling with fire. I collapsed once my body convulsing my cheek pressed against the gravel. For a moment I thought this was it, that the darkness closing in would swallow me whole. But then I remembered the journal under my pillow, the torn certificate taped inside the words I had written night after night. If I died here, my truth would die with me, and that was unacceptable. I slammed my fist into the gravel, forcing my body forward. Pain screamed, but so did defiance. I dragged myself another yard, another, until the faint neon glow of the sheriff's office shimmered in the distance, fragile but real. Salvation was there waiting if I could reach it. My knees buckled beneath me as I tried to stand, so I dropped again, crawling nails, splitting skin, tearing. The world tilted the stars above spinning, but I whispered again, louder now. They will not erase me. My words were hoarse, nearly inaudible, but they carried me forward. Step by step, crawl by crawl, I closed the distance. And when the glass door of the sheriff's office finally loomed above me, I slammed against it with the last of my strength, my blood smearing the glass, my body collapsing onto the wooden threshold. The fluorescent lights inside blurred as deputies rushed forward, their voices urgent. My lips moved trembling, and I forced out the only truth that mattered. My sister. The chair. My mom smirked. Then the darkness took me. When consciousness returned, it did not arrive gently. It ripped me from the dark with a sting of antiseptic in my nose, the sharp beep of monitors by my bed, the weight of bandages wrapped tight around my chest. My ribs were bound, my body bruised from shoulder to hip, each breath scraping like broken glass. I tried to move, but pain pinned me to the mattress. For a moment, panic surged. I thought I was still in that house, still trapped under Vanessa's shadow and Donna's smirk. But then I saw the sterile white walls, the IV stand beside me, the quiet hum of machines. The hospital. I was alive. A nurse appeared calm and steady, her hands adjusting the line in my arm. You're safe for now, honey. Just rest. Her words felt foreign, almost unbelievable. Safe was not something I recognized anymore. Hours blurred into days in that dim room. My body healed slowly, but my mind replayed the attack over and over, the crack of the chair against my ribs, Donna's smirk carved into my vision, Vanessa's laugh echoing like a ghost. Each memory pressed heavier than the bandages, but each one also sharpened my resolve. Sheriff Coleman Reed came on the second day. He was a broad man in his 50s, sunburn etched into his skin from years in Texas heat. His badge glinted under the fluorescent light, his expression steady but troubled as he pulled a chair beside my bed. "Rachel," he said quietly, "I need to know exactly what happened that night." My lips trembled dry and cracked, but the words came. Vanessa attacked me with a chair. Donna was there. She smirked. She did nothing. My voice broke, but I forced the truth out. It wasn't rage, it was planned. Coleman's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed with something that looked like regret, maybe shame. Vanessa's been trouble before, but this, and your mother standing there, that makes it different. Still, you know how it is here. He has allies. They have ears in every corner. If we don't have proof, they'll bury this before it ever sees daylight. My heart sank. I had lived under that truth for 25 years. Their silence was a fortress. But I had something. My journal, I whispered. I wrote everything down. Dates, words, what they did. It's under my pillow at the house. Coleman nodded slowly, resolve flickering in his eyes. We'll get it, but one journal may not be enough. That evening, the door to my room opened quietly. Evelyn Harris stepped inside. She was 60, a widow who had lived across the road for decades, her shoulders stooped but her gaze sharp. She carried a styrofoam cup of coffee, her other hand trembling as she set it on the table. "I should have come sooner," she murmured. I froze, tears filling my eyes. "You heard?" She nodded. "I heard more than that. I recorded it." She pulled a small recorder from her purse, pressing it into the sheriff's hand. Coleman's face shifted from weary to determined. He plugged it into his laptop and pressed play. The hospital room filled with the sound of splintering wood, my screams the thud of the chair, and then, chilling and unmistakable, Donna's voice saying, "Serves you right." My body trembled, tears spilling over as Evelyn covered her mouth, sobbing softly. Coleman snapped the laptop shut, his jaw set like stone. "That's enough," he muttered, his voice carrying a weight I had not heard from anyone in Willow Creek before. "Determination." Evelyn lowered her hands. I was afraid, she whispered. Afraid of them. Afraid of what people would say. But I can't be silent anymore. Silence is not safety. It is complicity. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I did not feel completely alone. News spread quickly in town. The grocery store aisles hummed with whispers. "Did you hear what Vanessa did? They say Rachel's ribs were shattered." Some dismissed it as gossip, but others lowered their voices, uncertain now. The Monroe image of control and perfection began to crack. Deputies searched the house. They found the broken chair splintered in the hall, my blood staining the floor, the journal hidden under my pillow, its pages filled with years of humiliation, cataloged in ink. Vanessa tried to block the search, screaming about lies, but the judge signed off after hearing the recording. Donna sat silently on the porch as deputies carried evidence from the house. Her smirk finally gone, her face pale and lips pressed tight. She didn't look at me when I was wheeled in to point at evidence. She only muttered, "This family needs peace, not more trouble." I wanted to scream at her to demand how silence could ever bring peace. But the words caught in my throat. My silence was no longer survival, it was fuel. Coleman stood beside me outside the hospital one evening, his hat in his hands, his voice low. "This time, silence will not save them." His words echoed in my chest. For the first time, silence was breaking, not just in me, but in the whole community. Evelyn returned the next day with soup in a thermos and tears in her eyes. "You gave me courage," she said softly. "You reminded me that silence keeps us chained. Now I'll stand with you." And she did. She testified, her recording played again and again, her voice steady as she said I heard it with my own ears. Donna smirked while Rachel screamed. The walls they had built of lies and reputation began to crack under the weight of truth. My body was broken. My ribs still bound my breath shallow, but for the first time in my life I felt stronger than them, because I was not alone anymore. The Travis County Courthouse had never seen so many people packed onto its wooden benches. The air inside smelled of varnish and dust mixed with the faint perfume of women who whispered into each other's ears, their eyes darting between me and the defendants. I sat in the front row, a brace wrapped tight around my chest, a crutch at my side, the fabric of my blouse carefully pulled to cover the bruises that spread like shadows across my ribs. Every step I had taken to get here had been agony, but I refused to stay home, refused to let silence speak for me anymore. Across the room sat Vanessa, her hair pulled into a sleek bun as though order could erase the violence in her hands. She wore a fitted blazer, her nails painted blood red, her smirk faint but present as if she still believed she could win this. Beside her sat Donna in a pale blue dress ironed flat, her hands folded in her lap, her face expressionless. She had chosen silence her entire life, but now that silence was evidence. The prosecutor, a young woman named Dana Alvarez, rose and addressed the jury, her voice clipped and strong. "This case is not about a family dispute," she said. "It is about brutality, betrayal, and a silence that became as sharp as any weapon." She laid out the charges: attempted murder, aggravated assault, complicity. Each word was a hammer driving nails into the Monroe image. Coleman was the first to testify. He described the night deputies searched the house, the broken chair splintered in the hallway, my blood staining the floor, the journal under the pillow filled with years of records. He spoke slowly, carefully, his Texas drawl lending weight to every sentence. The jury shifted uncomfortably when he held up the chair leg still streaked with red. Evelyn took the stand next. Her hands trembled as she clutched the small recorder, but her voice was steady when the prosecutor asked what she heard. Evelyn pressed play. The courtroom filled with the sound of wood splintering my screams, the crash of the chair, and then chilling and clear. Donna's voice whispering, Serves you right. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Heads turned sharply toward Donna, whose lips pressed tight as whispers erupted. People who had once praised her cobblers at church now stared at her as though she had grown horns. The prosecutor turned to the jury. That is not the sound of a mother protecting her child. That is the sound of complicity. Vanessa slammed her hand against the table, rattling her bracelets. Lies! She spat, her voice sharp enough to cut. She turned to the jury with wide eyes. My sister exaggerates. She always has. She wanted attention. She wanted pity. She's dramatic, unstable. Her lawyer placed a calming hand on her arm, but the damage was done. The jury had heard the recording, and no lawyer could erase that sound. Then it was my turn. My legs trembled as I rose, leaning heavily on the crutch, every eye in the room fixed on me. I walked to the stand, my breath shallow, my chest aching, but my resolve steady. The prosecutor asked softly, Rachel, can you tell us what happened that night? My voice cracked, but I forced it steady. At midnight, Vanessa came into my room with a chair. Donna was behind her. Vanessa struck me again and again until my ribs shattered. I remember the sound of bone breaking the blood, choking me. I remember my mother's face. She smirked as I screamed. My words trembled, but I forced them louder. They always told me silence was my place, but silence almost killed me. Today, I refuse it. Today, I speak. I lifted the hem of my blouse just enough for the jury to see the brace wrapped around my chest, the bruises black and blue across my ribs. Gasps echoed again. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably, Donna's face pale. The defense attorney, an older man with silver hair, rose to cross-examine. Miss Monroe, he began, isn't it true that your journal is simply a collection of private thoughts, not evidence? Isn't it true that you've been described as dramatic, even unstable? I lifted my chin. My journal is not fantasy, it is fact. Each entry matches dates, events, words. And now you have recordings to match them. He pressed harder. Isn't it possible you exaggerated, that your memory is colored by resentment? Before I could answer, the prosecutor interrupted, requesting the recorder be played again. My screams, the thud of the chair. Donna's laugh echoed once more. The defense attorney fell silent. The judge leaned forward, his voice firm. The evidence speaks for itself. You may step down, Miss Monroe. As I returned to my seat, the gallery didn't whisper this time. They stared wide-eyed, no longer with doubt, but with recognition. The cracks in the Monroe facade had become a collapse. More witnesses followed. Former classmates testified about bruises they had seen on my arms. A retired teacher admitted he had suspected abuse, but had been too afraid to speak. Neighbors confessed they had long wondered about the screaming, but convinced themselves it was none of their business. Their voices piled into a wall of testimony, each stone heavier than the last. Vanessa sat rigid, her smirk faltering with each witness. Donna's shoulders sagged further, her silence finally betraying her. By the time the prosecutor rested her case, the courtroom no longer belonged to them. It belonged to truth. The defense tried to rebuild the Monroe image, speaking of Vanessa's volunteer work, of Donna's presence at every Sunday service. They waved photos of church bake sales, charity drives, family portraits. But their words fell flat against the blood-stained chair leg, the journal entries, the recording of Donna's whisper. The jury watched unimpressed, their faces carved with discomfort. At one point, Vanessa broke down, slamming her fist on the table. She'll regret this, she hissed, her voice carrying through the courtroom. The judge's gavel slammed once, sharp as a gunshot. One more outburst and you will be removed. The gallery murmured, the last threads of her credibility snapping. When the final arguments closed, the prosecutor's voice cut through the silence. This is not just about bruises and broken ribs. This is about a family who chose violence over love, silence over truth, cruelty over humanity. The jury filed out the room, hushed with tension. Hours crawled by like years until the door opened again and the foreman rose. We, the jury, find the defendant, Vanessa Monroe, guilty of attempted murder. We find the defendant, Donna Monroe, guilty of complicity. Gasps rippled, then silence, heavy and undeniable. Vanessa's smirk shattered as deputies cuffed her hands. She screamed, thrashing her voice shrill. "This isn't over!" But it was. Donna stood slowly, her face pale, her lips trembling. She didn't fight the deputies. She only looked at me once, her eyes hollow, and for the first time I saw fear in them. I did not smile. I simply sat taller, my hand resting on the crutch, breathing in the collapse of the silence that had ruled my life. The day of sentencing dawned under a scorching Texas sun, the courthouse steps glaring white as people gathered outside, their murmurs heavy with anticipation. I stood at the bottom of those steps, leaning on my crutch, a brace still tight around my ribs, my breath shallow but steady. Reporters swarmed the entry microphones, thrust forward their voices asking what I hoped the outcome would be. I didn't answer. My silence now was no longer fear. It was control. Deputies led Vanessa through the crowd first. Her wrists shackled, her hair tangled from a night in holding. She tried to twist her face into a smirk, but it crumbled under the flashes of cameras and the cold stares of neighbors she had once charmed. Donna followed her dress, wrinkled her hair pinned too tightly, her eyes fixed on the ground. The woman who had perfected silence as power now wore it as shame. Inside, the courtroom was packed again, every bench filled, every eye fixed on the defendants. The judge entered, his gavel striking once sharp as a crack of thunder. "Vanessa Monroe, the jury has found you guilty of attempted murder," he said, his voice steady. "You are hereby sentenced to 25 years in state prison. Donna Monroe, the jury has found you guilty of complicity. You are hereby sentenced to 10 years in state prison." The words fell heavy, final, undeniable. Vanessa screamed, her voice wild, thrashing against the deputies. "You can't do this!" she shrieked, her face twisted in rage. Her voice cracked, no longer the confident cruelty of midnight, but the desperate panic of someone watching her power collapse. Donna didn't fight. She sagged in her chair, her lips trembling, her silence now an admission of everything she had denied for decades. The gallery shifted, whispers rising, but no one spoke in their defense. People who had once eaten at our table, who had once praised Donna's cobblers and Vanessa's charm, now turned their faces away. As the deputies dragged them out, Vanessa kicking and cursing, Donna shuffling with her head bent low, I remained seated, my hand gripping the crutch. For the first time, I did not lower my gaze. The sentence had been spoken, the chains of silence broken. Outside, the community felt the aftershocks. The Monroe name, once spoken with respect, now carried the weight of shame. Neighbors who had turned away when I screamed now whispered to each other in the grocery aisles, their eyes avoiding mine, but their guilt plain. The ranch, once a symbol of control, was seized by the county yellow tape stretched across its gates. Cattle hauled to auction, the lowing of animals echoing like a funeral dirge. Donna and Vanessa's church pew sat empty, the pastor's voice faltering when he tried to speak of family and order. Women who had once praised Donna's quiet devotion now shook their heads in disgust, their whispers sharp. How could we have been so blind? They asked each other. How long had it gone on? Silence was no longer seen as virtue in Willow Creek. It was seen as complicity. Vanessa's absence spread quickly. Her friends stopped visiting. Her name disappeared from conversations. Those who once laughed at her jokes in the diner now avoided speaking of her at all. Donna's legacy evaporated, her face becoming a reminder of betrayal instead of piety. The collapse of their image was not only legal, it was social exile. For me, walking through town on my crutch was surreal. Some people offered quiet nods of respect, others left casseroles on my porch with whispered apologies. We should have spoken sooner. We should have seen. Their regret didn't erase the years of pain, but it cracked the wall of silence that had protected Donna and Vanessa for so long. The courthouse verdict was justice on paper, but the real consequence was written in the faces of the community. The women who avoided eye contact at the market, the men who shifted uncomfortably at the diner, the children who whispered questions their parents couldn't answer. The Monroe name no longer commanded fear or respect. It commanded shame. And as I stood on the courthouse steps that day, the sun burning hot overhead, I lifted my chin when a reporter asked what I wanted to say to the people of Willow Creek. They took my ribs, but they did not take my voice. Silence was their weapon. Speaking is mine. The words printed in newspapers across Texas, a headline that struck harder than any gavel. The Monroes had lost everything, and I had begun to reclaim myself. Healing was not a single moment. It was a war fought in slow, grinding battles that tested me more than the night of the attack ever had. My body carried the evidence of survival ribs-bound lungs, scarred a permanent ache that surfaced every time I took a deep breath. The doctors told me it would be months before I could move without pain, and years before the nightmares faded, if they ever did. At first, nights were the hardest. I would wake drenched in sweat, hearing the crack of wood, the wheeze of my own breath cut short, Donna's smirk hovering above me in the dark. Sometimes I gasped so violently I tore at the bandages, convinced I was still crawling down that gravel road. The counselor assigned by the hospital helped me steady those spirals. She told me trauma leaves scars, but scars can be carried with meaning. She asked me to read my journal entries aloud to myself, to take back the words they had tried to erase. It felt impossible at first, my voice cracking as I read descriptions of humiliation and blows, but slowly hearing my own voice put power back in me. Each page stopped being a wound and started becoming proof of strength. Physical therapy was another battlefield. Each session left me breathless pain flaring through my ribs as I tried to stretch, twist, and walk again without feeling like my chest was splintering. The therapist was relentless but kind, pushing me when I wanted to give up, catching me when my body betrayed me. When I finally managed to walk across the room without clutching the wall, I whispered to myself, "I am still here." That moment meant more than the verdict ever could. Outside the hospital walls, life was different too. Some neighbors crossed the street when they saw me unable to face their guilt. Others brought food or flowers, whispering apologies they should have spoken years ago. I didn't know how to respond, so I accepted their gestures with quiet nods. Their regret was theirs to carry, not mine to erase. But Evelyn's presence was constant. She came almost every day, sometimes with soup, sometimes just with her silence that felt steady rather than cruel. She became more than a neighbor. She became proof that one voice can change everything. With her encouragement, I began to dream of more than just survival. I wanted others to know silence is not safety. I wanted no one else to crawl down a gravel road alone, believing the world had turned its back. Together, Evelyn and I founded a small nonprofit in town. We called it No More Silence. It started in a rented room above the library with second-hand furniture and a hand-painted sign, but its mission was clear: to give victims of domestic violence a place to be heard, to find resources, to know they were not invisible. The first woman who came through the door carried a toddler on her hip and a bruise blooming across her cheek. Her voice trembled as she said her husband told her no one would believe her. I lifted my shirt just enough to show the brace across my ribs and whispered, "They told me the same. They were wrong." She wept, and in that moment I knew my pain had become something more than survival. Word spread quickly. Soon, women from nearby counties came to the office, their stories echoing mine of silence demanded, of violence, hidden, of reputations used as shields. The local paper that once printed stories of the trial now wrote about the nonprofit, publishing a photo of me with Evelyn, our hands resting on a desk stacked with donated supplies. The caption read, "From silence to strength." Parents thanked me quietly in grocery stores. Strangers sent letters saying my story gave them courage to speak. At first, the attention overwhelmed me. I had spent my life being invisible, and now eyes were on me everywhere. But then I realized this visibility was my weapon. The Monroes had thrived on silence, and I would dismantle that power by speaking. I began traveling to nearby towns, speaking at community halls, sometimes facing rooms filled with older men and women who had lived their whole lives under the belief that family matters stayed private. I told them my story. I told them how silence nearly killed me, how my own mother's smirk cut deeper than the chair, how neighbors who shut their blinds had been accomplices. I told them that speaking was not betrayal, it was survival. When I finished, some wept, some nodded, some simply whispered, "I understand." I realized then that the message was not just mine. It belonged to every person who had ever been erased in their own home. Healing was not just about my ribs knitting back together or my nightmares easing. Healing was about building something bigger than myself, about ensuring no one else in Willow Creek or beyond mistook silence for safety again. The ranch where Donna and Vanessa once ruled sat empty, its fences sagging, its barns collapsing. To me, it was a monument to what cruelty destroys. My legacy would not be in land or cattle or family names carved into church rosters. My legacy would be voice journals turned to testimony, pain turned to power. Each night before bed, I still opened my journal. But instead of recording humiliation, I recorded victories. The woman who left with her toddler and never went back to her abuser. The teenager who spoke up in class about bruises at home. The church that finally opened its doors to host a domestic violence awareness event. These pages whispered back to me that healing was possible. That voice was stronger than silence. And though the scars on my ribs would never fade, they no longer felt like chains. They felt like armor. A year after the sentencing, I returned to the Travis County Courthouse, not as a victim trembling on a witness stand, but as a speaker invited to a community forum. The courthouse steps glared white again in the Texas sun, but this time I climbed them with my crutch steady under my arm, my body scarred but upright, my voice no longer shaking. Inside the room was filled with people from all over the county, some with gray hair and weathered faces, others young and wide-eyed. They sat in silence as I told them the story that had once been my cage. I spoke of midnight floorboards creaking, of Vanessa's chair crashing into my ribs, of Donna's smirk carved into my nightmares. I spoke of crawling down that gravel road, porch lights flicking off neighbors closing blinds, silence sharper than any blade. And then I spoke of Evelyn of Coleman, of the courtroom, where truth finally drowned out lies. I lifted my blouse just enough to show the pale scars across my ribs, the reminder of what silence had cost. They gasped, but I did not flinch. I told them silence was never safety, that silence was complicity, that my survival came only because I refused it. When I finished, the room rose in applause, some with tears streaming, some with hands clasped tight in prayer, some simply nodding their eyes sharp with recognition. It was not me they were applauding, it was the truth spoken aloud. That night, I walked back through Willow Creek, past the church that once praised Donna's cobblers, past the diner where Vanessa used to strut. The pew Donna had polished sat empty, the booth Vanessa had claimed now avoided by customers. Their legacy was ashes. Mine was still being written. Evelyn met me on her porch, a glass of sweet tea in her hand, her smile warm. We sat together under the Texas stars, crickets buzzing in the dark, and she whispered, "You saved yourself, Rachel. And in saving yourself, you gave the rest of us permission." Her words settled in my chest, heavier than any gavel. Months later, I held the first printed copy of my book, The Night of the Chair. It was my journals transformed into testimony pages of humiliation and bruises turned into a record of resilience. Holding it, I felt the weight of my younger self's trembling handwriting and the power of my older self's steady voice. The book spread farther than I had imagined, reaching readers across counties. Then states letters arriving from women and men who said my story gave them courage to break their own silences. Healing did not erase the scars. Night still brought dreams of splintering wood and Donna's smirk, but now those dreams ended with my own voice shouting back louder than their silence. My ribs still ached on cold mornings, but each ache reminded me that I had survived. Vanessa sat behind prison walls, her rage swallowed by concrete. Donna served her years, her silence no longer a shield but a sentence. They had lost their power, their community, their legacy. I had lost pieces of my body, but I had gained what they could never touch: my voice, my truth, my freedom. To the people of Willow Creek, the Monroe name was no longer one of control, but of shame. To me, my name became a promise. Each time I spoke in schools, in churches, and community halls, I ended with the same words. They tried to take my breath with their blows, but breath is not theirs to command. They tried to erase me with silence, but silence is not safety. Speaking saved me. Speaking can save you. And when the older faces in the audience nodded, when the younger ones leaned forward with wide eyes, I knew my story had become more than mine. It was a warning and a weapon, a scar and a shield, a reminder carved into bone and memory that family names mean nothing when they are soaked in cruelty. Only truth endures. Only voice saves.